Well, welcome back to Not Alone with Melissa Sue. Today, I really do want to start with taking a pause, taking a deep breath together. So close your eyes and take in a deep breath and a long exhale. Because today's episode is for anyone that's felt afraid and alone, and they are struggling right now in addiction, in fear, in grief, and shame. Because all those things, we're so hard on ourselves when we do it again. We pick that old pattern up again. And I'm not just talking about alcohol. There's so many kinds of addiction. Social media is one. You know, there are so many addictions, and this is for you right now because there's so much fear to recognize that old pattern. So we continue the numbing, continue that old pattern. So I'm here for you today with a very special guest that I met on Riders Island 2. And the minute I met Lori and we talked, I knew her message was so important. In fact, I kept on going, okay, I need to have you on my podcast. I need to have you. But of course, I'm not ready. I'm not sure. But I know how important her story is, her personal story, and her new book coming out soon, Born Addict, and her recovery program. She has been through it, the relapse, the chronic illness, the suicidal ideation. So this is for you. Or if you know anyone that is struggling right now, listen, because there's a lot more to know than just to go for recovery and know, okay, yes, you're sober now, you're in sobriety, but what's next? What's the missing link? And that is her program, The Missing Link. So today, I want to welcome you, Lori, and for having the bravery to write your book, the bravery and the courage to speak your truth, to share your story, and to be here today as, I don't know, is this your first podcast?
Yes, Melissa,
yes.
It is. Yes. And I'm just so honored to be here. And, it was something when we met on Writer's Island. And I just felt that connection with you right away when we started sharing. And, it is a crisis right now in the recovery world and mental health. What's going on out there is definitely a crisis. And as soon as we started sharing, I knew that we would meet again.
Yes, absolutely. There's so much that I was curious about, just your own personal journey, and even the title of your book, Born Addict, really intrigued us, because a lot of times let's say we've had family members that were addicts, oftentimes we kind of have that fear. Well, it's in my family. Maybe I'm going to be more susceptible to addictions. And so there's almost that fear. And so I'd love to touch base as to why did you call it Born Addict?
Yes, good question. I've been in recovery 29 years. Actually, tomorrow will be 29 years. And
congratulations. That's yes, a big achievement.
Yeah. And I only say that because it's been that many years in recovery. Prior to that, I was an active alcoholic. And prior to alcoholism, I was a hyperactive child with OCD and, just all the labels, the hyperactivity and the fear and the shyness. And I never felt right, even as a child. And so when I started drinking at the age of 15, that was a solution because it took the shyness away and I felt like I fit and I felt normal. And so, that was my solution for 20 years. But I got married, I had children, and there was many bottoms along the way that, crisis. And
And you're saying
I
there was
found,
fear when in the beginning you said as a child because OCD behaviors and all. I'm just curious, where was that fear coming from? Fear of judgment because of these behaviors, or fear, or was your environment? Were you living in fear, or?
yeah. So, I was an only child. But my family, my mom was Italian. My grandparents lived right across the street. We had I had great support. There wasn't any abuse. My dad was French. We had family around. There wasn't, and my environment was Northern Ontario, so plenty of lakes and nature all around. I didn't have a traumatic childhood, but I always felt alone. And, being an only child, I guess I thought that was normal. But there was something inside. I felt different. I always felt afraid. So this was like I felt like I was just like that since, from the time I was born. And I needed something. And so, early on, it was sugar as a child. And you know how Italians eat, they love desserts and
The
they love to
pasta,
eat.
everything.
Everything was
And eat
white
more.
flour, white sugar, white flour, and there was drinking, of course. But I never saw anybody drunk. And so that, alcoholism and being an alcoholic was shameful, but, I just it didn't connect. And, as I started drinking in high school, I was having blackouts and drinking to get drunk and drinking to escape and fit in, and and I thought, well, that's just normal too, right?
Yeah,
But
it was
I'm
normalized, right? In college,
it
and you're
was.
saying family wise too, like culturally, it's very normalized to drink and have
Right.
lots of drinks. Yeah.
But that was the 70s, late 70s and into the 80s. And, what I know now was not all the teenagers in high school were getting drunk. People were partying, but I could see my group were extreme drinkers, and I was always intoxicated, and I was the last one to leave, and I could never get enough. Now, those are characteristics of alcoholic drinking, and as it progressed, it became chronic where I couldn't go without it. And I was a young mom at that time, yeah, young, 26, with two young children, but I couldn't stop drinking.
And would you hide it? Like I find a lot of people kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
hide it well.
Yeah, hiding it. And I was in the airline industry, so I was working full time and I was trying to hide the alcohol. I needed it to cope. Um, so I thought it was my solution from an early age.
Almost
I
it seemed
switched.
like it calmed your nervous system. A lot of people, with addicts,
Right,
it kind of you didn't had learned the tools to calm your nervous, and when you said you're feeling like alone and you're feeling
right.
uncomfortable, so that drink released that for you, right? And that
Yeah, yeah. It calmed the nervous system down, definitely. And as a young child, even though I was out in nature all the time with my father and my grandfather, fishing, hiking, out at lakes, I still was addicted to sugar. I still needed the sugar. And I was in an environment that was calming to my nervous system, but I still wanted that sugar. And then it switched to alcohol, which is sugar, basically does the same thing to the brain. And so then it progressed. And we say it becomes progressive chronic, and it can be fatal, alcoholism and drug addiction. But, it was progressing in my 20s. And, I got sober when I was 36. So along that road, I had, I started going to treatment, first to detoxes, and then to treatment. And throughout, I'd go to treatment, I'd come home, and I'm back into the family, back to work, the stress, the busyness. And I relapsed 3 times after every treatment center. 3 times I would relapse. The 3rd time I was suicidal because the alcohol wasn't doing it anymore. It wasn't the fix. And, the bottoms and the crisis were becoming worse. So I had to actually leave the home and go live in a women's house for about 6 months, where this is where the missing link comes in, but I didn't know it at the time. So in the what we used to call it a halfway house, now we call it second stage housing, or it was just a women's recovery home. You're fed 3 meals a day. You have time to do your prayers and meditations and journaling, go for walks, go to meetings, because most of us weren't back to work yet. We were in this recovery home long term. So well fed, just using all the tools, right? And stable. And at that time, I had my counselor said to me, we're going to give you some B vitamins and some omega fish oils because we want to support, you need some nutritional support. And that's the first time I ever heard of anything like that. None of the treatment centers were handing out vitamins. They were not talking about food. They were feeding us, but they weren't talking about blood sugars and, protein and how to eat in recovery. So I got on those B vitamins and those omega oils, the fish oil, and I went home after 6 months. And that was when I stayed sober. And so I started to do more research because I thought, what's different here?
Yes,
Why?
right? You get curious. You're like, what was different? Why is this time working? Yeah.
Right. So, I went into 12-step recovery. My husband at the time was 7 years sober, and our kids were 6 and 10. And we carried on, and we were a family in recovery. And really, it was miraculous that we were both sober, that we could, because it's not the story, it's not the norm today. Families are splitting up and things, it's not, there's not a high percentage of recovery today. So, it's a blessing, really, that we got this. And so I started doing more research, and I was in 12-step recovery, and I found a book called Pass It On. And it was the story of Bill Wilson, who is the founder and the writer of the 12-step program. And so it was his autobiography, how it all came to be, right? And from 1939 and on. He died in 1971. And so at the very back of his story, he started talking about his 10 years of depression. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual program of action, right? Although they were the first program that ever coined alcoholism a disease. And that was by a doctor named Dr. Silkworth at Towns Hospital in New York, who had treated Bill. And so he knew that it was a disease, but they didn't have any science at that time. He said it's a body and a brain issue. And the main problem is centers in the mind. And, so they didn't have a solution for that other than complete abstinence. And then Bill had a session and was able to talk with Carl Jung. Carl Jung, right? The great psychiatrist. And he said, people with addictions need a spiritual awakening, and that will remove the obsession to drink. And so this worked for Bill. And it was how the 12-step program of recovery came into being. And then Bill wrote based on those two experts' opinions. And it worked, right? And now there's over 200 12-step programs for every known behavioral addiction or substance abuse, right? Disorder. But as Bill's story went on, he suffered 10 years of depression. And here is the spiritual person, like the most spiritual person that you could imagine in this program, right? He helped hundreds of people and gave us the program, but he was depressed to the point of suicidal for 10 years of his sobriety. And I thought, well, how can that be? It's a spiritual program. Shouldn't all the spiritual work and the emotional work be enough? Why is he depressed? He's our guru, right?
Yes,
he is.
yes. You think of people like, even pastors are depressed, and you're like, well, there's connected with God and a believer. So and that's why I love it, because it's bridging. You need spirituality, but also you need science, and you need, mind and body. And that's what you're saying.
And that's the whole basis. Right. And so I'm getting around to why I called the book Born Addict, but this is part of it. And so I started researching Bill Wilson and how did he get out of his depression? And, he tried LSD, and that gave him another spiritual awakening for a while. And he rode that for a bit, and he thought this must be the answer. But then the depression came back. And now today we know that lack of serotonin can cause depression. They didn't have the science then. And Bill was also a heavy smoker and a heavy coffee drinker, So he found a doctor named Dr. Abram Hoffer. Now, Dr. Hoffer was an orthomolecular scientist and a psychiatrist. And Dr. Hoffer was treating people with niacin, which is vitamin B3. And it was actually at a hospital in Saskatchewan, at a psych hospital in Saskatchewan. And Bill found him and he said, can you help me? So Dr. Hoffer started giving Bill 3,000 milligrams of IV niacin. And Bill's depression lifted within 2 weeks. The suicidal ideation went away. His depression lifted, and he thought, this is a cure. So Dr. Hoffer was working with schizophrenics and alcoholics at that hospital, and he had over 5,000 case studies, and he had cured a lot of people. And I use the word cure because he wrote the book, The Vitamin Cure for Alcoholism. Now, I thought, so I'm doing my own, I'm like, well, okay, this is why the B vitamins I'm taking. How did that obsession go away? It wasn't only a spiritual awakening. It was some support. It was the support of the vitamins. And as Bill's story went on, he never, he wrote the vitamin B papers, and Dr. Hoffer and him approached the 12-step program and said, can we add nutrition to the program? And they said, no, we're not bringing nutrition in here. There's no science.
Big key of mental health is nutrition.
No. And so then, Bill died of emphysema because he never stopped smoking. So we know today that smoking depletes, well, it depletes serotonin, and it also activates the dopamine loop. So it was always stimulating him for dopamine, hence the caffeine. And, I don't know his sugar intake, but this story, Bill's book and his autobiography, hit me like a ton of bricks, because I thought, I go to meetings, I've worked the program really hard, I help other people, I do my spiritual work, yet I started having depression at 3 years sober. And later on, I started with panic attacks and anxiety, and I'm doing everything right. Why am I I wasn't relapsing, but I was relapsing on the treatment cycle, right? And so Bill's story really fascinated me, and Dr. Hoffer. And I
That is so
started down.
Even as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh, how many kids really, like you mentioned, when you were young, crave the sugar. I see that in
Right,
my kids at time now, since we've gone the road of detox and awareness of the gut issues and whatnot, and doing the
right.
supplements. I noticed they were really craving the sugar and that dopamine hit, even the strolling, the videos, they're
Yeah,
watching, they're always
yeah,
constantly. So those are the signs almost. What are they going to go to
yeah.
when they're teenagers and adults
Right.
instead, right? So
Yes,
learning,
that's
so it's almost a call. So what do you think? Like when you're having that sugar craving, you're wanting that serotonin or a dopamine hit or,
yeah. So as I started to research this, and I'm watching people in meetings, and we're eating cake and sugar cookies. We're bringing them to the meetings. We're having so much caffeine, and people are not drinking or doing their drugs anymore, but they're still smoking. And um, and so you know dopamine is uh, is the what we're looking for. It's Dr. Hoffer applied vitamin therapy, which helped. He never really went into the neurotransmitters, right? Like the niacin helped for Bill because it helped to support the serotonin, right? But the dopamine was still being stimulated, the need for dopamine, right? So what I'm trying to say is, like, the switching addictions that happens, say, in any 12-step program, we give up the drugs, we give up the alcohol, then the sugar, then we go back to sugar. And I did that too, right? And then people don't quit smoking, and then the caffeine is there, then the behavior, so say somebody gives up all of that, right? But then the behavioral addiction starts. So obsessing on social media, gambling, shopping. I mean, you can name, just go on and on, because they become obsessions. So the search for dopamine is still there because the brain hasn't been fed. We still have a starving brain. And so this is where I started researching Dr. Kenneth Blum, Blum. And he is a pioneer. He's 86 years old now. He's got over 400 PubMed articles. He's a scientist, he's a neuroscientist. And he's actually coined, like, the genetic grandfather of psychiatry, because he's linked the genetics to addiction. And so he's developed what he calls Reward Deficiency Syndrome. And there are genes, there's 4 genes, about maybe more, that are definitely linked to the disease of alcoholism and drug addictions and all addictions. And he wrote an article called All Roads Lead to Dopamine. So this became my, what I started to research about myself, I got my genetics done and I found the Reward Deficiency Syndrome genes. And then through his papers, he uses the word, we are often born and genetically predisposed. We are born with this DNA, and those genes, they're either turned on or turned off. We now know about epigenetics, right? But those genes are your DNA. What I found out was, for me, this is what I was born with. It's kind of like that's the gun, and the environment and the trauma is the trigger.
The trigger, yeah, the activator
Catalyst.
yes,
Right? It's the catalyst. But here's what I've been given, and I was born with these genes, and I was genetically predisposed already to addiction. So that's where, I traced it all the way back to my mom and my mom's genetics. And she wasn't an alcoholic or a drug addict, but she was definitely manic depressive. She was on, lots of different anti-anxiety medications. She was under methylated. Methylation is a genetic,
yeah, I got
DNA.
tested for that, me and my kids, actually, the
Right?
MTHFR.
So there was so much, and I thought I was born addict. And I don't like the label addict or alcoholic because I don't believe in the label. But, I had to, that title for me was the truth. It was the truth of me. And I became my own case study. And so this is what I did with, Bill and Dr. Hoffer and now Dr. Kenneth Blum. His theory and his research has shown that we need to stabilize the dopamine neurotransmitters because there's a cascade that happens. It's not, dopamine is the master regulator, and then there's the serotonin. So there's a cascade, serotonin, GABA, and all the other neurotransmitters. But dopamine is the master.
So how do you stabilize it? Like, there's so much out there that always triggers us, right? Like you said, the sugars, the strolling, so much, right?
All of it. So this, we need dopamine repair, we need brain repair. And so neurotransmitters can be built with vitamins, minerals, and amino acids. Okay, protein. So my program is food first, because a lot of people with addictions don't eat. And we might eat breakfast and go all day and then have dinner. Well, in between, we've got hypoglycemia, low blood sugars happening, and we go looking for sugar, caffeine, carbs, right? And dopamine, scrolling. Dopamine, we're looking for something, right? To stop the emotions, but to fulfill what? The need for, the craving. So food
kind of that
first.
imbalance that you're feeling, nervous system wise, that imbalance, like you said.
Right. So your nervous system is upset. Your nervous system is in fight or flight. Your brain is, is starving. Basically, your brain is starving.
Yeah, it's missing all these nutrients.
So we have it's we're nutritionally depleted. And when we feed the brain first and we have a stable foundation, then a person can actually grasp the tools of recovery. Until then, you can stop drinking and stop drugs, but you're still looking for something else. because of the
The
dopamine
dopamine, the
depletion.
cravings are so loud, you know? So if we can
Right,
help quiet those down by stabilizing, you know, through, like you said, nutrition. That's why I had a guest actually in the beef industry is like, okay, it has to start even in the soil, what we're feeding the animals,
right,
our food source, because we're craving these nutrients. We're screaming for rich, nutrient-rich foods.
right. So most people are deficient. Like, all right, so somebody who's been drinking and doing drugs for years is completely depleted in their body of vitamins and minerals.
Oh, I see it.
And in
I see it in the mouth. I would see right away if
oh,
recovering meth addicts and whatnot in their teeth, and it's exactly it. It took away all the nutrients to their teeth, and they're completely
everything,
blacked out, you know, and they're all broken.
right? Teeth, hair. I mean, it's everything, right? And you know, how can we expect to take away the drugs and the alcohol and for a person to go and sit and be counseled and actually grasp those tools and the understanding of how to recover and how to be in the world now without a substance? Their nervous systems are wired, their brains are depleted, their bodies are falling apart. And so we go to rehab, we go to treatment, and we're well fed in there, right? But there's also vending machines with pop and chocolate bars, and people are also smoking in there and drinking caffeine. Now, they're not all the same. Like some rehab centers are different where they've taken all that out. But basically, there is no education on how to eat, what your body needs, what happens when you have low blood sugar and you have insulin spikes. Well, you get anxiety, you get shaky, you get angry, you're exhausted and you're going to go look for something.
Yeah, because you're crashing, you know, and
You're
it's
crazy. So we do the 30, 60, 90 days and we have no teaching in there. And then we send them on their way. And they're not taught how to eat, right? I wasn't. I would crash and I didn't know what was happening to me. I'd be walking around the grocery store and be dizzy and shaky, and I didn't know what was going on. And so this is my mission with Missing Link is you need to learn how to eat, stabilize blood sugars, and what to eat, how to eat, when to eat, stabilize your nervous system, and then we do supplementation because you need to build up your body and your brain. So it's vitamins, minerals, foundational support, and then amino acids. So, amino acids, we use targeted amino acids for dopamine and to give the brain the dopamine that it's craving through supplementation, right? And also serotonin. And so we have, but we target the dopamine first with all those cofactors to balance the brain, to feed it, so a person can have some stability, and then start their journey down the emotional healing, the spiritual path. Because when your brain is starving, you're in and out of fight or flight all the time, right? The frontal cortex is still on alert.
yeah, it's all inflamed. I actually went
All in
to a
place.
brain scan for my son, and that's where it was all inflamed. He was still in the fight and flight.
Right. And we can't expect children to calm down. So it goes back to my hyperactivity as a child, you know. And I mean, I used to get treats to calm that down, like
And you see that with a lot of kids that are ADHD, you know, the sugar cravings
right.
and all that. The dope is the dopamine, right?
Yeah, it is the dopamine, but it's also, if you look up symptoms of low blood sugar, which a lot of kids are having, but they're being labeled ADHD. You look up those symptoms. inability to focus, no mental clarity, hyperactivity, fatigue, wired and tired, restless, irritable, discontent. Those are words we use in recovery. And we've been taught that those are psychological, but they're physical. And this is happening with our children. We're not feeding them protein.
Oh yeah, true. The
Right?
nutrition is so poor. Like at the schools, I'm like, oh, it's terrible. Sometimes I'll do the hot lunch, but I'm like, oh no, it's terrible. It's awful. What we're feeding
It's
our kids.
awful. And so these kids are wired and tired. Your body needs nutritional support and the brain needs amino acids. Now, in beef, it's loaded with B vitamins, zinc, minerals, other minerals,
Yeah,
and amino
creatine.
acids.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, it's zinc. It's
Amino
so good.
acids, right? They're the building blocks. So Dr. Bloom, he believes that we need dopamine homeostasis, right? Like we need to get the brain to start to produce its own dopamine naturally. So we support with the combination of amino acids and vitamins, and slowly a person can come off of that because the brain will get to homeostasis. So that means I'm not going to go out looking for sugar and caffeine, and I'm not going to go on a shopping binge, and I'm not going to drink, but I'm not going to go into all these other destructive behaviors because I'm still looking for dopamine.
Wow. I love that you incorporate that. This is so important. And I love you also bridge spirituality to it as well, because that's kind of, I
Right.
always feel like that's the umbrella, but
Yeah.
there's the science behind it as well.
Yeah, and this is where, today where science meets recovery. And Dr. Bloom, I mean, they've done research. He has 70 scientists under him, and he works in Dallas still. He's 86. And they have pinpointed chronic pain, opioid addictions, all these other addictions. They've tested it on animals. They have brain scans. This is the truth. This is genetic predisposition. And if we test our children and we know and we start feeding them at a young age and we never trigger those genes, then we're not developing young addicts in our families.
Wow.
And
So
we're
what
not
are those
repeating.
tests? I'm curious. Like, are you saying the brain scans, or are you saying just seeing the nutrients, what they're lacking? What kind of tests would that be?
Well, genetic
Genetic
testing.
testing. Okay.
Yeah, genetic testing. And, we can actually stop addiction in its tracks if we have the genetic profile of our children. And, like I knew I had an uncle who was an alcoholic. My dad was insulin dependent, and his dad was insulin dependent. So here we go with the metabolic disorder. So when I got my genetic tests, I'm like, wow, like, okay, yeah, I have a metabolic disorder, hence sugar addiction, low blood sugar, hypoglycemia, diabetes. That's all metabolic. And alcohol is the trigger for sure for turning on that genetic predisposition, right? On my mom's side, it was mental health, mental illness with methylation, her manic depression, her postpartum psychosis, her breakdown after I was born, like it made it so clear when I saw my genetics. And so then the Born Addict title, it came to me in the morning. I think it was a spiritual download from God, because it was almost like this relieves shame,
Yes.
stop stigma. This is me. This is what happened. This is my story. I was born. from two people who were, you know, well, what's the word? My parents set me up for this genetically and ancestral. Like, you can go back further, uh, generations, and see these patterns, And so in my sobriety, um, stress so I went through a divorce at 50. I was 20 years sober, and I was in menopause. So I found out that I was undermethylated, and that affects hormones, our brain, mental stability. I had a complete breakdown. I didn't relapse with alcohol, but I went down the mental illness.
Yeah,
By
I'm glad you bring that up because yeah, I got tested for the MTHFR gene, and if I get my hormones checked, which I think any woman who's getting in her 40s or man, hormones play
yeah,
a huge role in your mental health and the
right,
fluctuation. Yeah.
yeah. And if you're, genetically undermethylating as a pregnant woman, you're going to have a lot of postpartum depression. And my mom had psychosis, and then in menopause, it hit me. And it was panic attacks and anxiety, suicidal ideation, So then I started looking at all of this. And then I started writing because, my children need to know this, my grandchildren. And so it's all there: mental health, mental illness, addiction. And I mean, you know, if my parents would have known this, we could have done something
Yeah, so
about
you're
it.
empowering people with this knowledge.
Right.
It's your hard-earned wisdom, it's been
Right.
really, yeah.
It's really, and the thing is that the shame and the stigma that goes with addiction, and what's happening now is that people are going to treatment, 5, 10, 15 times. And I see the stories and I hear them over and over and over. And, the relapse cycle is it's so out of control. And we're not bringing brain first recovery into the centers. And it is a missing link, because if you can stabilize the brain while you're in treatment, we're opening Pandora's box with all our trauma and our emotional stuff and pain. We're opening all that up in treatment and in rehab. And, you know, it's exhausting, but it's also very triggering. And so if a brain isn't supported, there is no way a person can process all of that. And that happened to me. It happened to me. I left that treatment center. I went heavy into the steps. I did my moral inventory. And then when it came to making amends, it was so overwhelming. I wasn't stable and I became suicidal, So this is what's happening. People relapse. We're going back into this rehab and doing the same thing again and not being supported, uh, you know, genetically, uh, brain wise, body, we're just running on empty,
And this
and
is so important.
we're expecting people to recover.
Recover in that
And
shame and not equipped with the knowledge of the brain health, nutrition, and
yeah,
that shame is probably where they're like, I'm such a burden. I don't want to be
yeah,
around anymore. And that cycle continues, that shame, because they go back like, why can I not get it? Or even
right.
they are sober now, but like you said, the depression is there. They're still not finding a lot of joy out of being sober. And
No,
how can we help them live a life of vitality and
right,
joy and
right.
fun again? And that
Yeah,
takes, like you said, the brain balance and
right.
just
It really does. It really does, because it's not working. What's happening out there is families are just breaking down. and people are going more and more into despair. And then, the thing is they might not pick up their drug of choice, but then the mental health goes down. And so this is what's happening. And then we're, medicating people that are clean and sober with pharmaceutical medications, which sometimes work, but a lot of times don't, right? There's so many side effects. And so the solution is it really is nutrition and brain support to turn off those genes, to stop the hypoglycemia, and to support and regulate the nervous system,
Yeah, I love
right?
that. So now, I mean, this is such important work, and I'm so proud of you, by the way. And so, how can people work with you, start this program, or so just share
Yeah.
how I'll put it all in the show notes, of course, but
Okay.
how they can
Yeah.
find you.
Okay. So I'm just going to read this because I wrote it up, and it's really a summary. What I do at Missing Link Recovery Solutions is we teach brain first, food first approach. Then we supplement, and we go through a whole dietary program with you. We look at all your nutritional needs, how you're sleeping, what you're eating, what your environment's like. I mean, we go through everything, set you up on a program that is supported so that you can go to your program of choice that is going to support you, and that you can recover. So we take away the I'm always in recovery, because recovery should lead to being recovered, right? We recover. And when the brain and the body are supported, we can take away that label and that life sentence that we're in recovery and that we don't live happy, joyous, and free, but with this um, underlying like fear, So sobriety is not the finish line, it's just the beginning, and biochemical repair is the missing link. Recovery is both science and soul, and the steps are just open the door, but biochemical repair gives them support, so that they can, just be part of society and be normal and live happy. And, I always tell people, like, they're not broken, and this isn't a moral issue. It's not a willpower issue. It's a brain depletion and dysregulation problem. Um, so, you know,
Which
my
hopefully will
hope
relieve the shame by you
is
seeing
relieve
it
the
that way.
shame, because once they understand this, that they're not morally weak, but they have a disease, just like any other disease. But it's been so stigmatized in society and shamed, because it really, I mean, of course, the symptoms are horrible. When you've got alcohol and drugs in your system, you are just out to find more, and you hurt a lot of people. And, the shame and care of carrying that.
Oh, I saw it with
Um,
my own husband. He had, it was started with the opioids, and then it was the alcohol. Then the alcohol was an everyday thing, and then I would find bottles on the ground. It was just, and the shame to
yeah,
even allow for him. It was even uh, allowing himself to see that that was an issue, and now he needs help, and so.
yeah,
And I think for a lot of people, it's that first step is knowing that it's to release that shame. People are going to love you no matter what. They're actually
right,
going to probably be really honored and see your strength for saying, "Hey, I've lost control."
yeah. And there is something, to surrender and say that you need help, and that I have lost control and I can't do this alone. I found that in 12-step recovery, but I knew there was a missing link, and I traced it back to Bill, and I just honor him for going forward and finding Dr. Hoffer. And that was the start, And in 1956, the American Medical Association said alcoholism is a disease. And in 1957, the American Psychiatric Association said this is a disease. Addiction is a disease. That was in the 50s. And then it got changed to be a psychological problem issue. And we started down the whole counseling route, and that trauma is the root of addiction. And then it's lack of connection. And we've been trying that. We've been trying to treat the disease of addiction as a moral, emotional, a trauma-based, lack of connection syndrome, or not a disease. And now science, Dr. Blum, and all the pioneers that aren't even alive anymore, they knew. Even one of the signers of the Dr. Benjamin Rush was one of the signers of the what do you call it? The American independence. I can't.
I'm not sure.
He coined it as a disease way back in the early 1900s. And so, in my book, I go back in history and I try to figure out, where did this get lost? What happened here? So I'm really, I just wanted to tell people today, if they're struggling with relapse, have had many treatments and rehab centers, and feel like recovery should be easier by now, I just really want you to hear this, that there is a way out. You're not broken, you're not weak, and you're definitely not alone. So if you're staying sober but still battling anxiety, depression, cravings, exhaustion, and overwhelm, it's just because the brain and the body are still under repaired. So if we feed the brain first, this is the missing link, and recovery is possible, and you don't have to do it the hard way. So reach out to me. I'm Lori at missinglinkrecoverysolutions.com.
Yes, I love it. That was perfect. And thank you so much, Lori, for joining us and sharing your important work. And I'm just honored to have met you.